Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and excited to tell you that the second edition of the Codist is out now. We ran out of the first printing, but the second edition is out and available to you on Kindle for just $2.99. If you want to know what can happen with your DNA, that it could actually be weaponized, and there's a plot to weaponize your DNA. And this is a plot that is so diabolical, but so biblical, so real, that it makes you wonder, is this really happening? Could this really happen today, where Satan wants to take out the Levitical priesthood line, the Levites, so that Jesus never returns? What a perfect book for this season right now, $2.99 on Kindle. And my latest book, The 7 Laws of Abundant Living, Lessons Learned from the Tree of Life. If you visit our webpage, ignitinganation.com, and scroll to the bottom of the page, click on the book cover and give us your email address. We'll give you the first chapter of this book for free. I'm excited this morning to meet with my new friend from Atlanta, Romal Tune, author of Love is an Inside Job, Getting Vulnerable with God. Romal Tune, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Thanks for having me on, Rabbi. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Romal is Vice President of TMS Global, while also maintaining his public relations consulting company, Tune & Associates. He's a highly sought-after communicator and seminar facilitator. His platform and cross-sector relationships have positioned him as a global leader who takes individuals and institutions from setbacks to success by using the power of story. He consistently travels the year helping individuals and organizations find deeper meaning, maximize their potential, and live into their purpose by listening to their stories and living authentically. Coming from a challenging beginning, Romal defied the odds to become an all-American collegiate scholar, who's who in American colleges and universities, and magna cum laude honor graduate with a BSN from Howard University and a master's in divinity from Duke University School of Divinity. As a military veteran who served during Gulf War Desert Storm, moving individuals from setbacks to success as leaders is something he knows full well, and is a part of your personal story of how you became an overcomer. You know, it's interesting that we're overcomers by the word of our testimony and the blood of the Lamb.
Revelations 12:11 is one of my favorite scriptures.
You came from humble beginnings. You've accomplished so much, but it's really the backstory. It's who was Little Romal and what was life like for Little Romal, and how did you come to this point in your story that you're now talking about your transformational relationship with God that healed, bound up the brokenhearted, and set this captive free. Tell us your story.
Yeah, so I think that my journey isn't unlike most people, I believe. I think we're all equal in essence, but our journeys are quite different. The human experience is very much the same. I grew up in the Bay Area of California. Challenges were around growing up in a single-parent home. We were financially challenged, is the way I would put it. I always tell people that people from low-income communities actually don't use words like poor to define themselves. Those are political terms. I didn't know we were poor until I got into careers later in life and started hearing that word. But growing up, we had financial challenges. Went to different school every year. Met my dad when I was 16, moved to New Jersey, lived with him and finished high school there, 11th and 12th grade. After graduating, served in the Army as a medic during Gulf War Desert Storm. And the Army is where I first learned that I was smart. Drill sergeants and others, I was doing well in my MOS, and in basic training, I was soldier of the cycle, which is basically the honor graduate, and was graduating the top of my class. And while in the Army, I had a former girlfriend from high school who went to Howard University. And I went to visit Howard and realized that people in college were not different from me. I thought that people who came from neighborhoods like mine didn't go to college, and families like mine didn't go to college. But I realized that these kids were no different. They made different life choices. And so I decided to start going to night school, and ended up having a 3.8 GPA, transferred to Howard University. Was a double major, biology and nursing. I wanted to go to medical school, so I wanted to do 2 degrees, and one that would get me in a hospital. Became a member of a church. Like some guys like me, I had a girlfriend who went to church, and she said, hey, if you want to date me, you got to go to church. So I said, hey, whatever it takes, praise the Lord. Next thing you know, I'm in church, and I become a follower of Jesus, and I start getting heavily immersed in ministry and Bible studies. And after graduating, I worked at a phase 3 pharmaceutical company. It was Boehringer Mannheim Pharmaceuticals, which then got bought by La Roche. And then I went to Quintiles Biometric. And one day, working on a phase 3 study and on my left and a Bible study on my right, looking out of my office window across from Virginia into Georgetown, came to the realization that I absolutely loved ministry. I could be a great doctor, but I really enjoy ministry. This is where my heart is. And so rather than medical school, I accepted a call to ministry, went to Duke University for seminary, graduated there again, top of my class, and went on to work in churches and on Capitol Hill, and then later started my own consulting company working with churches. My mom died 10 years ago, which was the impetus for my first book. Love is an Inside Job is a healing journey. I realized that, and as much as I had become successful, I thought, like I think many people do, that success will cover up the pain of my past. That if I achieve and I accomplish and I have a nice home and I'm able to travel the world, that will soothe the pain and, in essence, make me feel like I am enough. But success never delivered on the promise. And I found myself still yearning for more, for something deeper. I think sometimes you realize the more money and stuff you have, the more you realize that it's not doing what it was supposed to do on the inside. And when my mom died, I had to ask myself some hard questions about who am I? Who have I become? And why did I throw away my story in order to become this new person? Because people knew the honor graduate, the 2-time magna cum laude graduate from Howard and Duke, and they knew the military, but they didn't know my story. They didn't know what made me me. And neither did I, because I thought I needed to suppress that story in order to fit in. And I found that the more I suppressed it, the more it yearned to be spoken. There's a friend of mine that says, when you don't love all of who you are, the parts of you that you don't love will cause a revolt. And I found that those broken places in me were revolting against the success, that they were yearning to be healed and confronted. That wounded child in me wanted attention. And it still wanted the question answered, do you love me? And I felt like my answer at the time, and I talk about this in Love is an Inside Job, was I couldn't be still because I knew my answer to that question was not yet. I don't love the wounded parts of me yet. I haven't done enough. I haven't succeeded enough. I haven't won enough, which assumed that if I succeed more and buy more, I will eventually love myself. And it wasn't working. And I had to finally realize that my life was less about fighting to become and more about surrender. I had always believed that I had to fight for this and fight for that, when the reality is that God was waiting for surrender. And the essence of my identity was in surrender and just being and confronting the wounded places and healing them and redeeming what they had done to me.
You know, imagine, Romal, as you're telling your story, I see you praying with clenched fists, with closed hands. So praying to a God that you know of, a God that you know about, a God that you've studied in seminary, but praying with closed fists and not able to receive what requires an open hand, which is to pray with an open hand, which is a two-way. It's a release because you're letting go, but it's also how we receive. I can't receive a gift with my hands clenched. And so I've had the same journey that you've had. This is why I related to your story and related to you and wanted you on the program. Your book releases on April the 3rd, which happens to be my daughter's adoption day. Very special day to me. It's available to order right now on Amazon, so you can get the Kindle download. You'll get your book next week if you order it online. But the story is compelling because you debunk a number of preconceived concepts about growing up in a broken home, living as a broken person, but wearing the mask of someone healed, whole, and accomplished. And God says that everything that's hidden in darkness will come out into the light. And you went on a personal journey to dig into the dark places, those hidden places, those dark darlings of your heart, to confront them. How did you do that?
Well, I think, as I pointed out, surrender is key, and I think in that, one of my questions early on was, is there anyone in the Bible like me? And really understanding Scripture through the lens of identifying with it and identifying with the people. These are real people who had real emotions and real life challenges. And you look at a young person like a Moses who didn't have his dad around, who actually killed someone, and who had a stuttering problem and became a leader. He actually was the kind of guy most churches wouldn't have wanted in his early days. You look at Joseph, who was rejected by his dad. His dad didn't even embrace his dream. His brothers beat him and left him for dead. He went to jail, and again, he didn't fit the idea of what success looked like. Right. And all throughout the Bible, there are women like Rahab and Hagar, single parent mom, a woman who was labeled a prostitute. Even if we look at, David's story, he wasn't the son that was brought before the prophets when they said one of them will be a leader. He wasn't even included by his own father in that number. They had to go send for him. They were, the prophet literally was like, you got another kid around that you kind of left out of leadership? And looking at the human experience, what is it like to feel that way? And I could identify with how it felt to be an outsider, to be rejected, to be, in a sense, feel like you're not wanted. And even with journeying to what society calls success, carrying those feelings with me and actually living this past-driven present, those wounds not being healed. And I think what allowed me to sit down and say, okay, if I truly want happiness and joy, which I believe joy is way better than happiness, what am I doing to get in my own way? And is there anything going on with me that keeps me unhappy? And realizing that there were these experiences that have shaped my sense of self-worth, what I could and couldn't do, how I see myself, envisioning what's possible. And they were rooted in this past pain. And I came to the realization that I have to revisit these stories so that they stop haunting me. Because who I am now should not be defined by what happened then. These were experiences that happened in my life, but they do not get to define my life. And really questioning, how do I stop myself from being defined by what was said when I was a child or what was not said? Because sometimes when you're growing up, it's not just the things that are said to you, it's the things that haven't been said that you needed to hear. And revisiting those stories and redeeming what they took from me. Not connecting my sense of self-worth and my sense of confidence and even ability to old stories that no longer served me well. And then redefining myself. When I look at Scripture, you'll see this in Love is an Inside Job, my big thing was, if this is true for me, and I believe that it is, if Jeremiah 29:11 is true, that God knows the plans he has for me, plans to prosper me and not to harm me, plans to give me hope in the future. If this is true for me, then what is going on with me that keeps that from happening? Is there a part of my story that still I'm holding on to that contradicts what God's story is for me?
You
And
know
how
that,
do I now
right.
deal with that?
That reminds me of the statement I have met the enemy, and it is us. I
Yes.
have met the enemy, and it's me. You know, we give Satan so much credit. We almost edify him into, oh, well, your story is a story about Satan reminding you of your past, and you have this orphan spirit, and you have this spirit of rejection, and you know, it's Satan reminding you of your past, and God reminds you of your future, and we give all that credit, but in fact, we do get in our own way. We are the main actor in the story that's been authored, and we tend to act out the role that we think that the author wrote for us, but we have to get into character because the real person has to go put on a costume. You've got to go put on a mask. You've
Yeah.
got to go be that character, and instead of it being the real you.
Yeah, we get in our own way because we've accepted a story about ourselves as true and without questioning it. And loving it is an inside job. I begin to question, share the stories, like here's what happened, unpack it, allow people to journey back into that setting with me, and say, here's the story I accepted as true about who I am. And I never questioned it. Um, and now, as a man who, as a man, you should be responsible, you should own your sense of direction and destiny. And since that is the case, I am responsible for my journey of healing and confronting these stories and looking at them and no longer defining myself by them so that I can be fully present based on who I am now rather than what happened back then. So you're right. When we get in our own way, that's happening because we're still living into a story that we've accepted as true, and we need to question it and redefine who we believe we are in the world.
As accomplished as you are and as accomplished as you were, you recognized that you needed help from a counselor. You actually went to a therapist. And in the second chapter of your book, the verdict was therapy. I need someone to guide me through this. And in the book, you make a statement that black men don't go to therapy. I can't relate to that statement because I'm not a black man, but is that an observation, a truth? Is that something you found, and is that something you feel the need, because you included it in the book, and I know that you're sending a message and making a statement, talking to a community that I don't know the inner workings of that community to be able to relate to that statement. So help me understand that.
Yeah, I intentionally identified that the African American community and men specifically around not going to therapy, and then tried to pivot and show, well, actually, men in general actually don't go to therapy for the very same reasons. The point I was trying to make is that the reason men do not go to therapy actually has nothing to do with culture. It's the nature of how we raise men and how we define what it means to be a man. And men typically don't go to therapy because we believe it's a sign of weakness. We believe that it says we can't handle challenges. We believe, we don't trust people. And then the other one is, I think that men, we are taught to believe that, hey, life is hard. Life is a struggle sometimes, and you're supposed to be man enough to carry it all. And when we say we need help through therapy, we're saying, I'm not man enough to handle the struggle or to handle the burden of carrying it all. And we've never questioned that narrative. because it assumes that to seek out help, to actually have feelings, is actually weakness. And what we find is that it's actually both are a source of strength. And the interesting thing is, many men, regardless of culture, are told, be strong, don't cry, stand up, be your own man, stand on your own 2 feet. And then you end up getting married, and then a woman says, tell me how you feel.
Right.
And man's like, what? Like, feel? No one taught me that. She wants to engage your emotions, and we are not told, we're told, don't cry. That's weakness. Don't feel too much. You can be happy, but not too happy. You have to be a firm man. And then we wonder why relationships have challenges, because we haven't been nurtured to communicate. And those are learned skills, to be vulnerable. And we see vulnerability as weakness, when vulnerability is a strength. It takes courage to be vulnerable. It takes confidence to be comfortable in your own skin, to be vulnerable. And it's not a contradiction to strength. It's not a contradiction to confidence. We just need to start questioning these things that we've been taught as men and redefining them for ourselves, so that we have healthy, holistic lives, so that we don't, I always say to people, broken people break things. And the way we're nurtured sometimes is we are constantly, as men, in many instances, like a bull in a china shop when it comes to dealing with other people and feelings. We bump into our feelings all over the place, and we don't know how to use them.
Amen.
And we have to learn the skills.
I agree. We're talking with Romal Tune, author of the brand new book, Love is an Inside Job, Getting Vulnerable with God. It's often been said that we are crucified between 2 thieves, the regrets of the past and the worries about tomorrow. What if you could reconcile your past? What if you could live in the moment, surrounded by love, acceptance, coming to God as a little child, not as an orphan, not as an abandoned, not as a wounded, not as an unworthy, but one who was chosen by God to be loved. The heart He gave you is a heart He desires. Love is an inside job. We'll take you on that journey of how to get vulnerable with God. We're going to continue this conversation with Romal Tune, author of Love is an Inside Job, after these short messages. Back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only 2 ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The Teaching Archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, Prophecy in the News videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our one-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Back. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Romal Tune, author of the new book, Love is an Inside Job, Getting Vulnerable with God. Romal, welcome back to the show.
Thanks.
Romal, you went to therapy. You went and you opened, you were asked questions, probative questions. You got a chance to tell your story. And, you know, it's like the highlights reel. The first visit with the counselor is tell me your story, and I got a master's degree, and I got this, and I got that, and I've got 2 PhDs, and 3 languages, and I'm an author and they're just looking, they're writing down, and okay, so if your life is so perfect, and you're so accomplished, what are you doing here? Okay, what do you need me for? Oh, well, now we've got to speak about the unspoken. Now we have to delve into that area that I've put on this mask and hidden, and you want me to take off my mask. And I have to pay you to do this.
Right.
I have to expose myself to you, and I have to pay you to do this. And you're going to ask me questions that I don't even want to answer for myself because I'm afraid of the answer.
Yeah. Or I'm afraid that if I tell you the truth, people won't like me. Sometimes the first challenge, right, in therapy is actually being honest with a therapist and not giving them our representative. And the way you answered the question is typically how we respond to people who say, tell me about yourself. Right. And we start with what we do and where we work and our titles. And then at the end of it, it's like, okay, you've told me what you do, now tell me who you are. And sometimes our identities are so tied to what we do rather than who we are that it's hard for us to determine the difference because we've been doing it for so long that our sense of self-worth and sense of identity is tied to doing rather than being. not realizing that the very essence of your identity is not in your doing, it's in your being. And anything that you do is really a manifestation of who you already are. And what the good that you do flows from the good that's already inside of you. The gifts that you display are evidence of the gifts that are already inside of you. Before you ever do anything, you're actually already good. We end up getting that confused because society says that you are somebody when you do these things, rather than the reality of you were born someone, you were born amazing, and you're already good enough. Therapy helps us get back to that story, to redefining who we are based on the very nature of the moment you were born, God was pleased. Even if you look at it from a biblical perspective. A lot of this I talk about in Love is an Inside Job, but Jesus is born and God says, "This is my son in whom I'm well pleased." The next thing that happens is the deceiver comes and says, "If you are the Son of God, then do these things." But God, before he had done anything, God says, "Hey, I'm pleased already."
Right.
And then the enemy says, "But if you are, you'll do stuff. And so now prove that you are good enough." And we have to constantly engage in that battle of saying, "No, I'm already enough. And anything that I do is just an evidence of that." It's not, it's affirming me. It's not defining me. It's evidence of these realities. It doesn't create the reality.
So what does getting vulnerable with God look like?
Getting vulnerable with God is really about the being honest with God, not approaching God the same way we approach people, not wearing a mask with God. I've found myself over the years praying for the needs of other people when my prayer should have also been, "God, do it for me too." Sometimes in my work as someone who goes out and helps send kids to college through my nonprofit, and, I love giving. I'm a grateful giver. The challenge has been at times approaching God with request, and rather than honesty about my broken places. Rarely, I think we're conditioned to take our broken places to God and say, "God, these are the parts of my story that I tried to overcome on my own, and it didn't work." And in being vulnerable with God is full surrender, that there are no hidden places, that we are able to engage in conversation with God around our wounds, so that God shows us the people who can be a part of our lives and help us turn those wounds into scars. And that's part of the process of getting vulnerable with God. It's full surrender, and in that surrender, actually finding true empowerment. So it's a process of honesty.
You talk about vulnerability. Men aren't supposed to be vulnerable. You talk about honesty and digging deep and wrestling with the lies of the past, the seeds of doubt that have become the weeds of the soul. And you have to go in like you do a garden, and you've got to pull out and you've got to separate what's the good from the bad, what's the real from the perceived. And you have to change the voice that's in your head to the voice of God, so that the tape you're playing is not the tape of the words spoken to you by a coach, a pastor, a parent, or someone who has spoken negatively into your life, but to embrace the promises of God. And you've done that. You have now reached a point where you actually say you've moved from mess to miracle, from, why you're here telling this story is because you are an overcomer by the word of your testimony. That even though you accomplished all this and you got the check marks on all the boxes, the person was still broken, and in your brokenness you accomplished all this. Imagine in your wholeness what plans God has for you and why he took you through those places. His sovereignty is unquestionable. So your journey had to be like Joseph's journey to arrive at the point in Genesis 50 where he says to his brothers, what you meant for evil, God worked for his good so that many would be saved. Why tell your story now?
Yeah, I think for me, the purpose of telling the story is to invite other people into a conversation and an opportunity to look at their own stories so that they can see that they are not alone in their broken places, and invite them on a journey of healing their story and healing themselves so that they can fully enjoy their lives, understanding that there's nothing wrong with success, but you find a sense of gratitude when you're able to look at your life through the lens of having healed those things that have hurt you. And understanding that you can't always change the past, but you can change the way you remember it and how you allow it to shape who you've become. You can rewrite the story of who you are in this present moment. And the other aspect of it is I wanted to invite people into a movement, if you will, of healing and redemption, to look at their own stories, express gratitude, but also redeem those things that have been taken from them, to redefine their sense of self-worth, their confidence, their ability to dream and know that they can pursue those dreams, to realize that when you're afraid, that fear is rooted in a story that you've accepted as true, and you can redeem that confidence and that courage from that story. Your anxieties are rooted in a story that you have accepted, and you can confront that story and take back your confidence. And I want it specifically for men to be invited into a journey that says, hey, sometimes as men, we're broken and we run around breaking things and we cover it up with success. And every one of us yearns for a deeper sense of meaning and belonging, where the armor of being a man is heavy. And sometimes we just want to sit it down and know that that's okay without shaming or judgment, and realizing that you're right. You should have the right to sit the armor down, and without shaming and judgment, and understanding that that shame and that judgment you think will come is the story that you've been telling yourself. And you've accepted it as true, and so you've kept the armor on too long, and now you're tired. And it's time to sit it down and feel what life is like without the weight of carrying all of this stuff, and realizing that you're still a man. You're still the same man without carrying the stuff, and you can heal those stories.
If we don't change, then we really don't have a relationship with God, because we serve a God who wants us to be transformed and conformed to the image of Messiah. And in order to understand that, we have to get very personal. It's full contact. It's not a spectator. Being a believer, being a man, is not a spectator sport. We have to be fully engaged. And we have few role models about this kind of engagement. I mean, we looked at remembering Billy Graham, but his wife and his children said our father and husband was gone 75% of our lives. He was traveling on his crusades. So here was a present, absent father who still turned out productive, loving children, because the time that he gave them 100% of his time. They knew what he was doing, and he involved them when he could, and they maintained a humble, his net worth upon his death was about $25 million, but they lived in a very humble brick two-story home, not the lavish lifestyle of somebody who was a multimillionaire. And so we look at that and say, well, what was it about him that his backstory is his children say Dad was gone 75% of the time, present but absent, wasn't absentee, but you coined that phrase for me, present but absent. What does that look like now for you? Who do you look like, and who do you see when you look in the mirror? Because that's where it really comes down to. When I look at the man in the mirror, do I turn away because I don't like what I see? And how do I acknowledge that love your neighbor as yourself if I don't love myself? Then
you made me think of a friend of mine who is a high-level executive who was former alcoholic, and life had fallen apart, went through a lot of challenges, and he's thriving again as a high-level CEO in a major company. And he said, Ramal, when I overcame alcoholism, and I shared his story, he gave me permission to share it in the book. He said, someone came up to me at a party and said, I never thought you were an alcoholic. And they said, you're still the same fun-loving person you've always been. And his response was, I'm finally the person I was pretending to be. And in my journey, people are now saying, you seem so happy. Life seems so fulfilling. And my response is, I'm finally the person I was pretending to be. I was social media happy. Now I'm actually happy. Our social media posts are snapshots of the life we want people to have an idea of. They're not the whole story. I wanted true, unapologetic joy. And that required changing some things that went against social norms of what people think you should do and who people think you should be, and where you're supposed to go if you're happy, and which events you're supposed to be invited to if you're happy. And those things aren't what was giving me fulfillment. They weren't delivering on the promise because I was still pretending. And to become the person I was pretending to be, to finally have the life that I always wanted, required changing my view of myself and my view of what joy really was, my understanding of what would actually bring me joy. And when I got serious about it, and this is what the purpose of the book is, to show people, hey, that life you've been looking for is right in front of you. You've just been ignoring it because you were more concerned with fitting in and rather than standing out. And you're here to be amazing and to have an amazing journey, but you have to own it and take responsibility for it, responsibility for the life that you really want, and stop pretending. And I think that was a big part of it. Pretense and pretending go hand in hand, and they're a heavy weight. And that was something that I decided, it's not delivering. And so there's another way forward. And that way forward requires genuine honesty with the path that I'm on and the path that I truly desire. And that's what I really am trying to share with the reader in this book. There's a path that you're on, and is it the path that you truly desire? And if it's not, then why are you still on it? And what would you do differently to get on the path that you truly desire? What would have to change about you? And let's do those things. And, the book is about, hey, join me on this journey to finding your true and authentic self.
You'd lay out some steps for vulnerability with God. And I think they're very profound steps of how you arrive at the destination that you desire. And the destination you desired was to reconcile your past so that you could be present. And in the present was to be vulnerable, to be real, and to have the chains that bound your insides broken so that you could truly bind up the brokenhearted and set the captives free. That statement is so apropos for exactly what Jesus came to do for all of us, but you've actually put it into words, that you were brokenhearted and captive, and he doesn't tell you what he set the captives free from. It's whatever it is that's holding you captive is what he came to set you free from. And it's a lot of times, and I, for years, did a lot of counseling, and it was always reconciling, finding out whose voice it was, what that experience was, and putting it in a different lens, and asking God to show me, how do you see that? How do you see me? How do you see this person? How do you see the spouse? How do you see the mother? How do you see the father? Through his eyes. But you lay it out in a path that says love of God leads to self-love, leads to love for others. What are some of those steps in becoming vulnerable for God?
Yeah, realizing that everything that you are and everything that you desire to become, even the source of love, flows from the inside out. That there's the love of God that flows within you, and that love flows out of you to the world. For me, it was love your neighbor than yourself. In other words, I thought that if I did more for people and I loved people, they would love me back. And when they loved me back, that would be my evidence that I was worthy of love. So rather than realizing that I was loved and then letting that flow from me, I was pursuing love and hoping that it would one day fill me. And when you're hurt by people who don't reciprocate it, you can end up thinking that you're not worthy, and then you keep trying more and more to be loved. And then for me, it was finally a realization that this isn't working. And maybe I'll try it the way that Jesus talks about in the scripture. Love God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, right? And then love yourself, and then love your neighbor, right? So in loving God and in surrendering my thoughts to God about myself and allowing God to fill me up with the thoughts of who I really am, and believing that, accepting it as true, then allowing that to flow from me, that I am good enough, that I am chosen, that I am worthy. And that's what I want people to understand. Love is an inside job, is realizing that there's love already within you. There's confidence, there's reassurance, there's courage, there's hope, there's vision. That when you surrender to the love of God, all of that will flow through you and be manifested in the world towards other people and everything that your hands touch. But you have to stop fighting to become and surrender to who you already are. And that is you're an amazing child of God. And God wants nothing but the best from you. So why don't you let the best flow through you?
Romal, as I hear your story, and I have gone through the process of looking back with a therapist. You've gone through the process of looking back with a therapist. And what came out of it for me was Romans 8:28, that all things work together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And that when I had clarity about my past and my upbringing and my roots and what made me me and who I really was, I began to realize that I could not have the relationship with God had my father been different than the father I had my mother been different than the mother I had my sisters been different than the sisters I have, and that the relationship that I have with God today is because all those things were set in motion before the foundation of the earth was laid. And that when I embraced the fact that it was to sift me, refine me, to test me, to press me, to take me through a place of vulnerability where I could then be a reflection of God's love for me, that I would be his ambassador, as Paul tells us that we're called into this ambassadorship, as if we're speaking the very words of God. This is what I got from your book, that you went on the similar journey, and you put it so eloquently as you were transparent, you were honest, you're real, and this love comes pouring through, and now you can be accomplished. And those accomplishments are not what you point to. It's, how have I loved today? How have I helped another today? How have I allowed joy to flow through me, that I've been able to change someone else's circumstances to give them the opportunity to go on a journey that I've gone on myself, and I came out the other side, reborn, renewed, refreshed, and vulnerable, because love is an inside job. Romal Tune, author, Getting Vulnerable with God, this amazing story of your life and your journey. Thank you so much for sharing it with us here on Revealing the Truth. And to our audience, we want you to read this book. I know many of you have struggled, and come to me with your struggle. Will you pray about this woundedness, this hurt, this orphan spirit, this sense of abandonment, this unworthiness, this feeling that you're not worthy to be loved? You were loved before you were created. And when you embrace that and you take everything out of the shadows and bring it in the light, your giants are reduced in size. And your past does not define your present, and it certainly doesn't define your future. Who you are in God, with God, not asking you to do more for him, but asking you to do more with him, and be vulnerable with yourself, to be vulnerable with God, will make you a person that you really, truly want to be. Romal Tune, God bless you, and may the Lord bless all the works of your hand.
Rabbi Walker, thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much. All right, stay tuned, and we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.